Welcome to Resilience in Life and Leadership with your host, Stephanie Olson, speaker, author, addiction, sexual violence, and resiliency expert. Hello and welcome to Resilience in Life and Leadership, and I am here to introduce to you Virginia Jones. Virginia and her husband raised and homeschooled their two daughters while working in the ministry. While homeschooling, they realized it was the best decision they could have ever made. When Virginia's days of homeschooling were over, she found that her time was her own, and she tried several things and came to discover podcasting. She loved it from the start, loves to meet new people, discuss people and events and history, and talk about her little homestead, and most definitely the Lord Jesus Christ. When she's not podcasting, she's enjoying her hobby and hopefully business of photography, her homestead, and spending time with her family. The world is full of amazing people and many opportunities to learn something new. She believes everyone is made unique and beautiful, and each day brings an opportunity to lighten someone's load, bring a smile to a weary face, and inspire those around her. Welcome, Virginia. Hello, and welcome to Resilience in Life and Leadership. And I am here with Virginia Jones. So excited to be talking to Virginia again because I was a guest on her podcast, A Vintage Lady, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And she is a busy woman with two podcasts and a lot going on. So welcome, Virginia. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And yes, I did have you on my podcast, and it was such a pleasure having you on mine.
It was great. It was a great time. I love podcasting from a fellow podcaster to a fellow podcaster. You meet so many amazing people that you would just never meet ever.
Right.
So
yeah.
great.
I have met a lot of amazing people. Yeah.
Yeah, it is fun. So when we were talking about a little bit about my story and all of the things you said, I have a story as well. And so that's what we're going to talk about. So why don't you just start sharing your story wherever you want to begin?
Okay. Wow. Goodness. Wow. I would say it was from a really young age. So my parents, we lived, oh goodness, in several states. My dad was in the Navy, so we moved around quite a bit.
Yeah.
And my earliest, goodness, wow. I don't know. I mean, I would say probably 8 or 9 years old. And in telling my story, I by no means mean to dishonor my parents in any way. So I just want to let everybody know that. But I would say, and I was thinking about this the other day, how I would do this, but I would say, probably 8 or 9 years old is when I started to pray that I would never be like my mom. And I started to understand she wasn't a person I wanted to pattern my life after. Absolutely. She was actually raised in an orphanage, and her mom was unable to take care of her. She had several siblings. So being a single mom, my grandmother, it was hard for her to raise, and I believe there were 7 children.
Wow.
So it was really tough for her to raise all of them. And goodness, my mom was born in, trying to remember, I think it's like 49. I think it's the year she was born.
Yeah.
So, it was really tough, and they were dirt poor, so they didn't have a whole lot. So being who my mom was, now looking back, I can say, with some empathy, maybe the way she was because of all that she had gone through.
Absolutely.
So she was raised in an orphanage. When she was 16 years old, she ended up getting double pneumonia, and they did not recognize it or take care of it. And she ended up with severe asthma. So she had extreme asthma her whole entire life. And then when I was around, I'm going to say 11, maybe 10 or 11 years old, Um, my parents ended up divorcing. My
Okay.
dad was gone most of the time. He was home on leave, 6 months, gone 6 months. And
Yeah, that would be
so
hard.
she herself was a single mom
Mhm.
raising two kids. So with her asthma and then raising two children, not having a husband at home, I think she allowed bitterness in her life. Um,
Mhm.
there were days when she was okay, and then there were days when she got pretty angry and
Yeah.
stuff. And I was trying to recollect some memories, and your mind is such an amazing thing, and
Yes.
it actually protects you. And I think
Yes.
that's the mercies of God.
Yes.
But one definite clear memory in my mind, and I don't know how old I was, maybe, I don't know, I might have been 9 or 10 years old, maybe 11. I'm not
Mm.
exactly sure, because it's almost like this memory and then my dad leaving was really close
Oh,
together.
sure.
So I just remember them getting into an argument, and I remember it being over the amount that was in the checkbook. It was over money.
Mm.
And I
Mm.
remember my dad just, throwing the kitchen table, and
Oh
plates
my
went flying
gosh.
everywhere, and they were screaming and hollering. Um and shortly before that, because my mom, unfortunately, she took her anger out on her kids.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I remember, and I'm not trying to be too graphic, but I
Sure.
remember being stripped and I was beaten with a
Oh.
belt.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And
Wow.
sorry.
Mm. That's hard.
um and my dad walked in on it, and
Mm.
he stopped it. I mean, she probably would have killed me had he not stopped,
Wow.
the
Wow.
situation. But when he left knowing that we were going to be left in her hands. Years later, I was able to go out and visit my dad in Idaho. When he
Oh,
left,
wow.
he lived in a town not too far away from us for,
Okay.
several years. But then he ended up moving to Idaho. So he
Mm.
was, 3,000 miles away.
Right.
And it's really hard to build a relationship with a parent when they're that far away.
Yeah,
It's almost
absolutely.
impossible.
Right.
Um, so when he left knowing that my mom was the way she was.
Yeah.
And when I was able to visit him, I confronted him with it, and I
Did you
told him that
really?
I
Good for
forgave
you.
him.
Yeah.
But it
Wow.
was hard. And I told him, you deserted me. You left
Mhm.
me in the hands of a woman who was an angry person.
Right. Right.
Um, so after the divorce, we ended up moving to Florida. And that was because my mom's family was down there.
Now, did you have siblings?
Do I?
Yeah.
I have one
Yeah.
brother.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And he actually lives about a half an hour away.
Got it.
And I'll get into that in a minute.
Sure, sure.
um, so we went to Florida, and it was because she had family down there, and she was hoping
Mhm.
for some
Support.
support from them.
Right.
Unfortunately, that didn't happen.
Mm.
um, and then the doctors told her that Maine would be a good thing for her because of her health and everything.
Oh, okay.
Right. So we ended up moving back to Maine. When we came back to Maine, we lived right across the street from a Baptist church.
Mhm.
Well, actually, maybe that was before. I apologize. I'm so
You
sorry.
know, well, and I think
Um,
that's an important point that I just want to make because when people experience trauma, their memories of that time are not linear. And
yeah,
so that's really important
right.
to understand. And trauma memories are just kind of
Mhm,
jumbled all over the place. So it makes
right.
total sense. Yeah.
Right. Actually, that was before we left. um,
Mhm.
and the funny thing is, it's not funny, haha, but um, there was abuse. I mean, I was talked down to, I was
Mm,
told I was nothing, I would
yeah.
never amount to anything. And the Baptist preacher, who we went to church with, this
Mhm.
person, and he was also a teacher in the local school. And one day I actually broke down in his classroom and cried.
Wow.
I I just broke down. He never once came to our home that I remember.
Really?
Never. And I don't ever
Wow.
remember him coming and talking to my parents or anything like that. I
Wow.
can't remember him ever coming. So we ended up moving to Florida, coming back to Maine.
Wow.
We did move back to the town that we were in before, and we lived in
Mhm.
just a different section of the town and everything. Um, and then later we ended up moving to Gardner. It was there in Gardner that I got witnessed to by a friend who, unfortunately, she's not living for the Lord right now.
Mm.
But she witnessed to me and invited me to church, and I went, and the Lord saved me. And
Mm.
but before that, before I came to the Lord, I tried to commit suicide
Oh,
twice
wow.
because I
Wow.
just felt like I was nothing, I
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
important, anything like that.
Mm.
After I came to the Lord, my mom and my brother also came to the Lord. My
Wow.
brother has backslid. He's not living
Mhm.
for the Lord. And I thought, my mom has got the Holy Ghost. She's been baptized. She's saved. Things are going to be different, right?
Mhm.
Unfortunately, that didn't happen.
Mm.
Um, I no longer received physical abuse, but I still received the mental.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
constantly told I would never amount to anything, that I was no
Wow.
good, nobody wanted me. So skip to several years later, um,
Mhm.
I ended up finding my husband.
Mm.
I apologize. I'm sorry.
No, cry, please.
I ended up, the first time we actually met was at a roller skating rink, and it
Oh,
was a youth function.
oh, wow.
And we were skating, and before we got off the skating rink floor, my husband squeezed my hand. I knew right then. I'm like,
How old were you?
uh, 16, something like
Wow.
that.
Wow. That's like every 16-year-old girl's dream in the 80s for sure when we're
Right,
skating. Oh my goodness,
right.
that's great.
And so later I saw him at a senior camp, and I'm like, oh my word, he goes to my church. I didn't
Oh,
really
wow.
associate it with that. So one night, I was walking across the front of the church, and my husband and his friend were on the drum set over across the church. And as I
Mhm.
was walking across the church, the Lord said, "That's your husband."
Hmm.
And,
Wow.
and just as clear as day.
Wow.
And, one thing I want to point out here is, a lot of people say that you marry someone that's like your dad, right? And a lot of people, and I have found that to be true in a couple of my friends' lives.
Mhm.
They marry exactly like their
Sure,
parents.
sure.
I refuse to do that. I said I will
Yeah.
not marry somebody like that.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be my mom. I made that, like I said, from a very young age.
Yeah.
I never want to be like her. I just
Right.
don't. And every girl should want to be like their mom.
Right. Right.
And it should be, but I was determined. I'm like, no way, I'm
Yeah.
not being like
Yeah.
this. And so, the Lord told me, that's your husband. So, a
Mm.
couple of years later, we end up getting married. And in the midst of all this craziness, even though I came to the Lord, I would not call God Father. I refused.
Oh,
I'm like,
sure. Because
how
we
can I call God
equate.
Father?
Yeah, absolutely.
My dad abandoned me.
Mhm.
And it was several years later, quite a few years later, I don't even know how many, that I finally came to acknowledge the Lord as my Father.
Mhm.
And I actually had a guest on my show, that wrote a book, Hey Dad, It's Me. And
Mm.
she was describing how, even though she didn't understand God as her father, he was her father through the
Right.
whole entire
Right.
process of her situation. And looking back on that now, I know God was with me.
Yeah.
I know he was. And, he has a purpose for me. I'm
Yeah.
here now. I'm telling my story,
Doing
and
amazing
somebody out
things.
there
Right.
is going to
Mhm.
hear this, who's going to see this, and say, hey, I can relate to this.
Right.
So when I married my husband, it took years for him to reprogram my mind. And,
Mhm.
a lot of times my husband and I will tell people, because some people will say it for Christians, oh, you're brainwashed, and I'm like, yes, praise God, I am. I've been washed by the blood of Christ,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it took years for my husband to actually help me to
Mhm.
see that, what, I'm somebody. I'm a
Right.
daughter of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He is amazing.
Yes.
And he chose me,
Mm.
and what an awesome God we have,
Yes.
to
Yes.
know that through all my craziness and through all the
Yeah.
stuff that I went through, and I wasn't a perfect kid either,
Mhm. Well, yeah.
I
None
turned
of us are
to
Jesus, right?
cigarettes and I turned to things,
Right.
but
Right.
God still loved me.
Yeah.
He still chose me. So several years later, we ended up having our first daughter. And then 6 years later, we had our second one.
Oh, wow.
um, and, looking back, and I say this with shame in a way, because,
Mm.
you say you don't want to be like your parents. And I didn't want to be like my mom, but there were some things and I ended up being like her, and when I saw that, it shocked me. I was like,
Mm.
God, forgive me. I don't want to
Mhm.
do this. I don't want to be like that. And I've really gone through a struggle recently with that, because my husband and we've struggled with gut issues for over 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's been a lonely road
Mm.
because, we don't have a lot of friends. We don't have any really,
Well, and
unfortunately.
you live in a pretty isolated area, don't you?
Yeah, it's not really that though. It's um we take some stands in the word of
Mm.
God that not don't necessarily go with people's narrative.
Mhm.
And so we
Mhm.
don't really have a lot of fellowship.
Okay.
And then, with my husband's illness, I wasn't getting any companionship from him either. So,
Mm.
I've had to really struggle with this. But I was thinking today, and I've been grumbling and I've been
Mhm.
complaining, but on my podcast, I like to end it with gratitude makes what we have more than enough.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
today, as I was going outside and it was sunny out and it was cold,
Mm.
but it's sunny, and I'm
Mhm.
like, God, I do not want to be a bitter person, because my
Yeah.
mom was
Yeah.
bitter.
Yep.
She was jealous of me.
Hmm.
And every time I would have an accomplishment, she would want to be like that. Or I'll give you an example. Like, um, when I got my camera for my photography
Mhm.
business, and my mom's like, well, instead of praising me for,
Right.
oh, I'm
Right.
so glad that you're getting this and it's getting off the ground and blah, 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 whatever. She's like, well, how come you can't buy me one?
Oh,
It's like, so it
wow.
was always stuff like that,
It always turned back
always,
to her.
yeah. And it was
Mhm.
constantly self all the time.
Mhm.
And so as I'm going out today, I'm like, God, I don't want to be bitter. I don't want
Yeah.
bitterness will destroy you.
It kills. Yeah.
And it
Absolutely.
aged her.
Mhm.
It separated her from her kids and her
Mhm.
grandchildren.
Mhm.
And going to my brother, I do have one sibling. He lives probably 25 minutes away. Throughout the divorce, though, and because of all the divorce, it has caused like a chasm. And
Mm.
it does. Divorce tears
It
families
does.
apart.
Yeah.
And it destroys families. And it not just destroys the parents and the children, but it
Mhm.
destroys the grandchildren. My daughters don't know their
Wow.
grandpa.
Wow.
And then on top of that, I struggled with a little bit of bitterness with
Mhm.
my dad remarrying. He ended up marrying, and she had 3 children.
Mm.
Well, now he's raising a whole new
Right.
family.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I'm struggling with jealousy. I'm struggling
Hurts.
with anger and bitterness. It's like, where were
Mhm.
you when I needed
Right.
you? And now
Right.
you're raising these 3, and I
Right.
don't even really know them. I mean, I
Right.
visited with them a couple of times. I've never seen my oldest stepbrother. I've never seen him. I probably will never see
Mm.
him. So all these things, people think divorce, oh,
Kids are
it'll never
resilient.
affect
Mhm.
anybody, but you
Mhm.
don't realize how much it does affect.
It does. Yeah.
And with mental abuse, words hurt, and they cut
Yes.
so deep.
Yes. Words are
And
very powerful.
yeah, and you never heal,
Mhm.
really. I mean, even coming to the Lord, I still struggle with days when I tell myself I'm not good enough, and then I'll
Mhm.
I'll stop, and I'm like, you don't have to be,
Yeah.
because God is.
Yeah. That's
I'm
right.
never going to be good enough,
Yeah.
but God is.
Right.
you know.
Right. Right.
So
Wow. Wow. It's so, there's so much to unpack in your story because, and first of all, I am so sorry that that happened to you. I think that people really need to, because there's a lot of, there are definitely a lot of similarities that I can
mhm,
really hear in your story to mine. And I think the biggest one is that abandonment piece,
mhm,
that when there is abandonment, it is so massive. And they say that one of the biggest traumatic events in a child's life is the abandonment of a parent.
mhm,
And so when you look at that and then you add that layer on top of it, your dad abandoned you knowing that he was leaving you with an abusive parent.
right, right,
And that is so, I mean, so that just compounds
mhm,
that trauma. And I think that those are things that we just really need to recognize. And I was just talking about trauma today and talking about really embracing the healing of our trauma, because
mhm,
first we have to recognize it, and then we
right,
have to forgive ourselves
mhm,
for, because you said it, you feel shame, you feel all, but none of that was your fault
right,
at
right,
all. But for
mhm,
some reason we feel, gosh, this is, now I am doing what was done to me, or
mhm.
whatever it may be. So, wow.
Yeah, and one memory that just came to my mind, and I've asked myself, many times, what did I do to
Mhm.
deserve that or whatever. When my mom was on her deathbed, and I don't think I've ever told anybody this, actually.
Mm.
Um, when she was on her deathbed, I held her hand for a few minutes, and there was favoritism between
Mm.
my brother and I. My
Yeah.
mom showed a lot of favoritism to my brother,
Mhm.
and that's, I don't hold that against him. That's the way
Right.
my mom was. But as she was dying, I held on to her hand for a few minutes, and she pulled her hand away from me.
Oh,
And some
wow.
people can say, well, that's just the body reacting, or
Mhm.
but I knew,
Oh, wow.
that even in death, my mom rejected me.
Wow.
And that really hurt. And then I went through a whole fiasco after she passed away, but I really, that's something in the past, and I've really I've come to a closure with that.
Yeah.
But you know parents really need to be careful,
Yeah.
how they parent their children, and words can cut so deeply, and showing favoritism to one child over the other, that can be felt. It really,
Yes.
really
Yes,
can.
it can be. Yeah.
And I really feel like I have forgiven my mom. I hope I have
Mhm.
because I want my relationship with the Lord to be
Right.
at the best, that
Right.
it can be. Um, it doesn't mean, however, that, if she were still alive, that I would just be buddy buddies with my mom,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And, speaking of her, passing, I was thinking again today, what questions is she going to ask? How am I going to say this? um, but, some people ask me if I miss my mom.
Mm.
Um, and my answer to that, and I hope to some people it doesn't sound harsh, but there are some aspects I miss about her, but
Sure.
in many ways I don't.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's just real life,
Yeah.
it's just the way it is. I mean, when you
Yeah.
have an abusive parent, it's hard. It's hard to love them.
Yep. And sometimes I think that we have to put those boundaries in place.
Hmm.
And sometimes that means that we're actually not even going to have a relationship. It,
Right.
it could
Yeah.
mean separation to the point of I need to distance myself
Hmm.
from you
Right.
so severely. And, I think that forgiveness piece is so important because forgiveness is a choice, not a
Hmm.
feeling.
Right.
And we make that choice over and over again. And I love what you're saying because that, you're not going to feel all those
Mhm.
feelings of, oh, that person is wonderful now. And if that person were here, I would spend every minute. No, forgiveness is saying, I choose not to hold bitterness. I
Mhm.
choose to forgive you. And that has to be almost consistent because those feelings are going to come up again over and over and over.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I
Gosh.
mean, I would say, on a daily basis, I'm having to choose to walk a different way. Even parenting, I mean, I chose to parent
Mhm.
differently. Yeah,
Right.
I made mistakes. I mean, my daughters
We
will
all
tell
did.
you,
Yep.
but I chose to love my kids. I did not
Yeah.
tear my children down.
Right.
When they made mistakes, you don't go and beat them over the head with
Right.
it.
Right.
You know, you
Right.
try to build your children up, and when they have successes and victories, embrace that.
Celebrate them. Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think too that we learn from our parents, whether we
Mhm.
learn good or bad, we learn from our parents.
Right.
And y- I think that is that, and parenting, oh my gosh, hardest thing in the world.
It
Just,
can be.
oh my goodness. And it's a fabulous thing and it's
Mhm.
amazing. But
Right.
I can't even tell you how many times I've said, oh, I regret doing this. I wish I would have done it this
Right.
way. And you
Mhm.
just can't go back. But
Right.
that's God's grace. That's where,
Right.
God gives you the grace
Mhm.
to his mercies are new every morning.
Right.
And I love what you're saying about gratitude.
Mhm.
Um, and so I would love for you to talk a little bit because you touched on those old and I'm going to date myself, but those old tapes playing in our mind, the
Mhm.
old you're not worthy, you're not, that
Mhm.
that really that is used against us by the enemy through whomever.
Right.
What do you do to reset your mind, reset your thinking?
Wow. There's a lot of times that I'm having those thoughts in my mind, and
Mhm.
I will kind of look into, this spiritual mirror, I guess you
Mhm.
could say. And I'm nothing. Okay. I'm nothing without God.
Mhm.
And I know that, if it wasn't for the Lord, I would be nothing. And that's true.
Mhm.
But I am something in Christ
Mhm.
because my identity is not in me.
Right.
It's not in who I am. It's in who the
Mhm.
Lord is.
Right.
And and I've had them quite often lately, like with my podcasting and, trying to do all this crazy stuff.
Mhm.
And I'll explain a little bit more about that. But in all of that, I've started to beat up on myself. And
Mhm.
then I'll look in that spiritual mirror and I'll say, no, no, you're
Yeah.
not going
Yeah.
there. You're a daughter of the king.
Yeah.
You may not be able to do this, but in Christ, I can do all things.
Right. Right.
And so to do it, like to do with my podcasting and my photography, and I'm trying to build a photography business. I'm trying to do 2 podcasts and, I'm on different social media things. And so this year I made it a purpose that I was going to cull some things out of my life. I've removed some people off of
Mhm.
social media
Always a good
because
thing. The
yeah,
toxic. Yeah.
they're not wanting me to be a part of their life.
Mhm.
So, and that's one thing I don't like about social media, and I'll talk a little bit
Mhm.
about that too. Um, but I made it the purpose that, okay, I'm going to clean my plate a little bit
Yeah.
because I've got too much on it. And I'm going to focus on these things because I don't want my marriage falling apart. I don't
Right.
want my kids, my children, one daughter still lives with us, another daughter lives about a half an hour away.
Mhm.
And, we'll go out for coffee and, I'll go over to my oldest daughter's house. We'll do some crafting and, we're building that relationship still.
Right. Right.
My husband, even in all the craziness that's going on right now, we're still together. And I have to focus on the good things. I have to
Yeah.
focus,
Yeah.
okay, I still have my husband here.
Right.
We're going to be able to get through this and we're going to be
Right.
strong for it.
Right.
So I'm trying to clean my plate a little bit and decide, okay, what things do I need to prioritize on?
Mm.
One thing you can never take for granted is relationships.
Right.
Don't ever do that. And if you
Mhm.
can, build your relationships with your kids and your spouse. If you have to, like you said, if you have to, sever some relationships
Mhm.
to help you to stay healthy, then that's what you need to do. And
Yeah.
that's what I've had to
Exactly.
do.
Mhm.
And, talking about social media, social media, a lot of people go on there and they can say anything.
Right.
And I have this year said, you know what? I'm going to be real with people. And if there are people that I have on social media who are not going to be a part of my life, who are not going to be real with me, then I'm going to remove them. I don't need them in my life. If you're not
Mhm.
going to take the time to have me or invest in me, then
Mhm.
why am I even having you on my friends list,
Right.
on
Right.
Facebook and stuff?
Right.
Um, and we can get so bogged down in the social media thing and we can put anything we want to on there when in real life people are hurting.
Yeah.
There are so many people on social media that, yeah, they can put a smiley face on
Mhm.
their profile, but really they're falling apart.
Mhm.
And I do my podcast because I want to inspire people. I want to help people that,
Right.
what, there is hope.
Right.
There is hope. And, I say to anybody who, has gone through mental abuse, whether it be from a parent or a spouse,
Mhm.
there's even parents who are abused by their children
Oh yeah.
mentally.
Yep.
Um, you know, if you have to sever that relationship or if you have to have a separation, then
Mhm.
do it.
Mhm.
Try to get help. Try to
Yeah.
get somebody who will stand beside you. And,
Yeah.
like my husband, I mean, and you can even ask him today. I mean, we've been married for 32 years.
Wow. Congratulations.
And even now is still, don't talk like that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Don't tell yourself that,
Mhm.
so I'm
Mhm.
still struggling with it.
Yeah. It's a process.
Yeah.
It truly
Yeah.
is a process, and
Right.
it's not a quick fix. There is, I think God rarely provides that, okay, miraculous healing right then, because one of
Mhm.
the things that we can do when we learn through those is help others through those.
Right. Right.
And I was always looking for miraculous healing in every
Mhm.
part of my life. God's like, nope, sorry, I want you to
Right.
teach, and you're not really relatable if you can't
Mhm.
tell that story. So I think
Right.
that's
Well,
beautiful.
yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, like with my mom coming to the Lord, and,
Yeah.
you know, I do believe she went on to be with the Lord. I do believe she had faith. There were some areas, like all of us, we all
Yep.
have areas to grow in.
Yep.
But when she came to the Lord, I was thinking, oh, great, she's going to be a whole different person now,
Right.
and it just didn't happen. And
Mm-hmm.
then later, I talked to my aunt, her sister, and she did tell me that she was a different person before she got on medication and stuff. Because of her asthma, she ended up on prednisone, which I
Mm-hmm.
know from a personal
Mm-hmm.
experience with my husband, it does change you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really does. And,
Right.
she said she was a totally different person before. So,
Wow.
in some ways, looking back, I can have some sympathy, empathy for her,
Yeah.
and but it still doesn't change. It's like I wish I
Yeah.
had had a mom who I could have bonded with, in a deeper way. But
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And so you grieve that.
Hmm.
Yeah. And
Right.
that's a good thing. And then you have an opportunity to I've heard say, you have two opportunities. If you don't have the parents you want, then you can
Hmm.
be the parent that
Right.
your kids need. And
Hmm.
so you've obviously done that, which is great.
I've tried.
Yeah, that's
By
awesome.
God's grace.
Yes, I love that. So tell us about your podcasts.
Okay. Well, I have a podcast called A Vintage Lady and one called The Cafe Manna. So on A Vintage Lady, I like to have people on who have inspiring stories, who've really faced a lot of obstacles and
Mhm.
overcome and been achievers. And then I like to talk about people and events in history. I like to talk about our homestead. We're trying to build a small homestead
Oh,
called Barton Cottage Farm. It's
wow.
from the book Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen.
Yep.
I'm a Jane Austen fan.
That's great.
So, I like to talk about different stuff like that. On the Cafe Manna, it's more of, a Bible based. I'm trying to get guests on there who are, inspiring leaders who
Mhm.
are, have a world Bible view of the
Mhm.
world and
Mhm.
things. So I'm just starting out with that one, but I've been doing a vintage lady, goodness, wow, a year and a half now,
That's
something
great.
like that.
I love it.
Yeah.
A vintage lady who has two podcasts, which is very modern.
Yeah, true.
That is great. I love it. And then your photography. Tell us about that.
Okay, so I would say, oh my goodness, I don't know, sometime last year. I can't. Oh, September of last year, I think is when I started that. I think I can't remember. Anyway, it's called A Girl in Gray Photography. So I
Mm,
specialize in black and white photography.
nice.
Again, vintage. I like
Yes.
vintage stuff. Old fashioned. I'm just an old fashioned thinker. I love the old fashioned ways, and stuff. So I specialize in black and white photography, and I like to do a lot of stuff in macro photography. So I really like to get up close and personal with my
Mm,
subject. And I do a lot of nature, landscape, stuff like
neat.
that.
That's neat.
I hope to eventually get my stuff in some galleries, maybe some magazines and stuff. So who knows
Good
where
for
that's going to
you.
go, but
That's exciting.
yeah,
That's
I love it.
exciting. I do too. So, where can people find you, Virginia?
Okay, I'm on Facebook. I did have an Instagram account. I got rid of it because the Instagram is pretty much focusing on my farm and stuff.
Okay. Okay.
But you can find me on Facebook. So if you go to Facebook and you look up a vintage lady, I'm on
Great.
there. So
Great.
yeah. And if
Awesome.
you want to email, that's a vintage lady 1817 at gmail.com.
Perfect. All right. And I'll make sure to have all of those links in the podcast
Okay.
notes.
All right.
But
Awesome.
final question for you.
Okay.
What does resilience mean to you?
Wow. I would say, coming back from, any kind of struggle, coming back with a strength and a vigor that
Yeah.
that means, you can be stronger than you were before, and you can learn from what you've gone through. And, just like, I question sometimes why I went through all that, but I went through it for a reason. I went
Yeah.
through it to be a witness and a testimony to other people. So I
Absolutely.
think, coming through a situation and being stronger for it.
Yeah. I love that. That is beautiful. And you are, you have an amazing story, and I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
the work you're doing. And I really appreciate you coming on the show. It was great to talk to you from this angle. So
All right. Awesome. Thank you so
thank you.
much for
Thank
having me.
you. And thank you for listening to Resilience in Life and Leadership. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening. Please share with anyone you think will benefit from this podcast.